Okay, well, welcome everybody. I know that folks are still rolling in, but we are going to get started today just for the sake of time. I am thrilled to see you all here with us. I recognize that most of you are tuning in over your lunch break, so please feel free to eat your meal, stretch your legs. I know that you're not a robot, so do what needs to be done. We are recording this today, so if you registered, you will automatically get a recording from today. So if you have to leave early, no worries about that. And then just general housekeeping reminders. Please keep yourself muted while others are speaking, but feel free to send reactions through our chat room. You can send an emoji up on your own screen. That just helps us as speakers know that you are alive and well. We love to see that. So we'll do some introductions. My name is Amy. I use she, her pronouns, and as MREC's engagement manager, I'm a great person to connect with if you have general questions about MREC or if you have questions about today's content. I will also be able to connect you with the right staff member if I don't have the answer to your question, or I'll just walk with you as we find the answer together. AJ, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone. I'm AJ. I'm the communications manager here at MREC. So if you get our newsletters, I'm the one sending those. Um, yeah, same as Amy said, you can also reach out to our info at MREC for any questions you might have for me. Um, and I think the other thing is oh, Amy, were you going to talk about questions in the chat next?
Yeah, feel free to go ahead.
Oh, just gonna say, you're welcome to put questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and we're gonna have a nice section at the end to answer those.
Absolutely. Pablo, would you like to introduce yourself as well, our behind the scenes today?
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you all. My name is Pablo Siqueiros. I am one of the new program officers. I just started back in November. So I'm just helping support this webinar today. So I'll be monitoring the chat for any questions that you're putting in there, or if I have any answers for you that I can provide in the moment, I can do that. Otherwise, I'll just kind of collect those as we kind of do that section at the end of the webinar today.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very glad to have this team here with me today. And yes, like AJ said, please feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go along. Again, for those who just popped in, you're going to receive a recording of this. So feel free to look back at this contact info here. And for those of you who are here joining us, please, if you'd like to put your name and the organization that you're from in the chat, just to let us know a little bit about you, we would love to hear that. I know there's probably a lot of like-minded folks joining us today who are interested in helping local Minnesotans, so we would love to have you get to know each other today. I will just say AJ and I today are both sharing from our own experience as well as from kind of this collective archive that MREC has, which we're very thankful to have access to. I personally have practiced and taught this content for about 7 years now, but I never call myself an expert. There's just so much to learn and to know in this area. I find it far more helpful to start conversations about these topics rather than assume that I know everything. So today's theme is going to be more conversational. So we're not coming to you as experts, we're coming to you as people who have a lot of experience and would love to hear your experience as well. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. After the welcome, we'll jump into a digital walkthrough. We'll also have access strategies, which is a little bit more of a broad look at things that you can be doing with your team. And then for our Q&A, we have purposely left a lot of time for Q&A, so please come with any and all questions. Like I said, you might have wisdom to share, so we'll be sure to invite you to share your thoughts as well. And again, please put questions in the chat as we go along. We just don't want you to forget all those good things that are popping up as we're speaking. So before too long, I want to jump in, but before I officially start talking to you today, I do want to point out a few easy things I did to make this presentation accessible to more people. And I want to say as well that, the title of this presentation is Access on a Budget, and today we're going to be talking, we might use the term, this is an easy thing to do, but that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. So I want to emphasize access is so, so important to your organization. It means a lot to us as at MREC. And I'll also say when we think about the ADA standard as nonprofits, which all of us should be meeting, think of that as sort of the jumping off point. So we want you to do the ADA minimums and then keep going. Look for more ways that you can provide access. So when I say easy or on a budget, I definitely don't mean that it's not worthwhile. I just mean they might be more feasible for you. So in this presentation, we turned on captions, and you can change that in your own settings as well. But that just helps folks who are hard of hearing or deaf. We also left this space for captions in our presentation layout. There is nothing worse than turning on captions and realizing that you can't read them because there's something behind them. We are also going to briefly describe any images or illustrations today. That just helps anyone who is visually impaired. It also gives context to everybody, which is helpful. We've also made all the text to background interactions high contrast. And I want to point out, I gave you a couple examples of how to do that. So if you're using this lighter kind of orangey color, something more bold and bright, I recommend the white background for high contrast. Keep in mind, I made the smaller text blue so that it popped out more. You could do a darker background with white text. That's a great way to create a high contrast. Or the classic choice, which is of course white background with darker text. Keep in mind, it doesn't have to be black and white. You know, black and white is the safest option because it's highest contrast, but feel free to put some colors in there as well. This is a lovely blue that we chose because it was still a great contrast, but it let us be a little aesthetic as well. And then lastly, I just clearly stated a time for questions at the end of the presentation. And this might seem like a no-brainer moment. Of course, you're going to do that. But it is so, so helpful to people. I started thinking about this especially when I used to lead youth programs because teenagers, kind of as a demographic, are always uncomfortable in situations. That's just the nature of growing up, of puberty. It's a demographic that sort of always feels out of place. So by giving them clear structure and telling them clearly that I want to hear from you at the end of the presentation, this is when I will call on you. That just gave them the opportunity to think about what they were going to say, maybe write it out if they were going to write it down for me. And it also assured them that I did want to hear from them, which is a very important thing to do. So again, that's kind of the theme of today, is that breaking down barriers is so, so important, and it's often a lot easier than you think. So all of these things took me 2 seconds, and they have a tangible positive effect on our audience today. So the image on your screen here is a white circle, and you can see a little icon in black outline of a phone and a computer. That means that it's our digital walkthrough, and I will turn things over to our digital expert over here at MREC. So AJ, take it away.
All right, thanks, Amy. Yeah, as mentioned before, though, I am not a digital expert or not a digital accessibility expert. Most of what I'm going to show you today, I've learned from working in communications and working on websites for a little more than a decade, and working with people that have knowledge about accessibility practices. So again, it's very much a group effort, learning from your colleagues and learning from the knowledge that other people have. That being said, there's some simple things that you can do to put yourself sort of in a good place for your digital content. I'm also going to show you a couple of free websites that can be really useful to you too. So Amy, if you want to go on to the next slide. So the first thing I want to talk about related to your text. If you are an org that has a lot of written information that you want to convey to your audiences, often in the nonprofit world we do, something you want to consider is the reading level of your text. So something that I've learned is that the average American reads at about a 7th or 8th grade reading level. So about a middle school. And the reading level accounts for sort of the sentence length, the complexity of the sentence structure, and the vocabulary that you use. And I'm going to show you this when I go to share my screen, but there are a lot of online reading level checkers that you can do, that you can use to check your content. So again, if you're going for a wide audience or an audience that you're maybe not familiar with, 7th or 8th grade reading level is best. But if you know your audience and you know that it's a specific or a niche group, you can absolutely modify. So I worked in museums for a long time, for example, and museums will generally aim for like a 9th or 10th grade reading level. And I think this is something that often we don't think about is making that text something that everybody can read and everybody's going to feel welcome reading. They're not going to feel that they're being excluded, based on using really fancy words or anything like that. There's a couple things you can do to modify the reading level of your text. One thing that I really try to avoid is passive voice. There's a lot of passive voice in the nonprofit world, I will say, especially in the grant world. So to avoid passive voice, I can give you a little example. So passive voice would be, my lunch was brought by Amy. If I wanted to shift that around and make it active, I would say, Amy brought my lunch. So again, and that makes the sentence shorter, sweeter, directer, more accessible for people who are reading. So another text-based tool that I highly recommend you use, and that's becoming more and more common these days, is to use your alt text and your image descriptions. Now, you might not know this, but those things aren't, they're similar, but they're not exactly the same. So your alt text is what is going to appear in place of an image if it doesn't load properly on the screen, or if someone with a screen reader is perusing your website. So the best practice for your alt text is to keep it to about 125 characters, which is about 15 to 20 words, which is not a lot of words for sure. So when you're writing your alt text, what you want to consider to keep it concise is why you're selecting that particular image and what you want to convey with it. And make sure that when you know that, then you can focus on what you want to describe in the image. So an image description, on the other hand, is available to anyone reading your website or any of your platforms. So it's usually in the photo caption or in the text post on social media, for example. And the image descriptions are, again, as I said, available to everyone, and they're useful in a lot of different ways for a lot of people. Someone that has low vision that maybe can read the website but just needs a little bit more context. Anybody that learns better through text. If you're like me, when I'm watching TV, I like to have the captions on because it can just, sort of describe what's happening in addition to watching and viewing. And anybody that has any sort of visual processing differences can find them useful. So the image descriptions are usually more detailed. Around 280 characters is appropriate, about 30 to 40 words. Perfect. Thank you, Amy. So I have on the screen an image and then an example of an alt text versus an image description. So for my alt text, I wrote, a smiling person sits on the grass in a field arranging flowers on the ground in a colorful pattern. And so why I wrote it this way is because this art activity that this photo is capturing, that was the whole point of the activity, was to take all these beautiful flowers and arrange them in this really beautiful pattern on the ground. So for the image description, though, I have a little bit more room. So I said, a bright sunny day, a smiling person sits in a grassy field arranging flowers in colorful patterns with baskets of flowers beside them. So a little bit more detail, sort of expanding a little bit wider in the image, you might say, into what's happening. One thing I want to note when you're writing your alt text and your image descriptions is try not to assume the identities of folks in your images if you don't know for sure. If the people are the focus of your image and you're not certain of their identities, you can focus instead, on describing their clothes, their hair, how tall they are, and their manner. Like I said, that this person is smiling while they're doing this activity. And this helps you, just avoid misidentifying anyone by mistake and keeping the focus on the purpose of the image in the context. So any platform, digital platform that you might use is going to have an option in some way to add the alt text. So on your social media, for example, Instagram, it's in those advanced settings, and then accessibility. And there's a box for you to write that alt text. And then Facebook, you'll hover over that image or right click on that image, and there'll be a place to edit it. For your website, it's usually in the media upload section of your website. When you upload an image, there'll be a place for that information. So another thing I want to just mention briefly is that a lot of times it will suggest using AI or artificial intelligence to write your alt text. I don't really have a strong feeling either way. I don't have all that many images that I'm using a lot of the time, so I prefer to write them myself. If you have a lot of images that you need to write alt text for, it can be a really good tool. The only thing I'll say is you should probably go back and read what the AI has written, just to make sure that it's focusing on that context and it's focusing on what you want to convey. All right, so now we're going to go and look at some websites to go over a few tools you can use. So I'm going to share my screen instead. All right. So I'm going to start with the MRAC website. So if you work at a nonprofit and you're maybe in charge of the website or you work on the website, you might find that like our website, it was created many years ago, and it's maybe a little bit of a Frankenstein's monster of people that have been updating the website or making changes. Oftentimes, the nonprofits, we don't necessarily have the funds or the resources to hire, a developer or someone that's going to be really in that website. So that can make, checking the accessibility a little bit more challenging. But there are a couple of things that you can do that are just going to be really easy ways to make it a little bit more accessible. So at MRAC, we have a WordPress website, and with WordPress, you can add plugins to make changes to the website. So if you see on the side of the screen here, we have this little tab. It has a person in a wheelchair, and this is an accessibility plugin. It's called One-Click Accessibility. And so if I go ahead and click on it, it pops out. And you can see it provides a lot of ways of altering the image that might be useful to people with various vision differences. So you can increase the text, you can change the contrast, which makes it often easier to read for people. And then you can just hit reset to change it out. The reason why, you might know also that people that have that regularly use accessibility tools also have them on their end, which is totally great. And but in addition, when you have it sort of native into your own website, it can make it so the response of the website sort of stays within the design of the website, which can make it a little bit have a little bit of a better response to some of those changes. So I can just show you real quick. So if I go into the back end of our website, it's kind of a mess, but that's okay. And of course, now it's not loading. Okay, there we go. And I scroll down here, we have our one-click accessibility plugin. And on the back end, it allows you to sort of choose the accessibility tools that you want to keep enabled or have disabled. So it's really sort of adaptable. All right. So that's our one-click accessibility plugin. Another thing you can do that I've learned pretty recently, and this one's sort of really easy to implement. So if you're not familiar, the way a screen reader works when it comes to a link, a hypertext link, is that it says link, and then it reads whatever text that you have highlighted. So the best practice is to keep those hyperlinks as descriptive as possible. So you can see here on this page, I have a hyperlink that says sign up for our monthly newsletter. So the screen reader is going to come to that and it's going to say link, sign up for our monthly newsletter. If I had it instead as just sign up or anything that says like click here, those are going to be a little bit more confusing on a screen reader because it's just going to say link, click here. So the person using the screen reader might not know exactly where they're going if they click on that link. So keeping them nice and descriptive is a really easy way to improve the accessibility of your digital sites for screen readers. I also want to point you to a really useful resource. A lot of the information that I've learned has come from this page. It's called Web AIM, Web Accessibility in Mind, and it has just a wealth of resources about your digital accessibility. I will say that it's very dense, right? There's a lot of information here. So usually I come to this website when I have a specific question about whether or not something that I want to do is accessible. But that being said, it does have a lot of articles that you can read. If you know more about HTML or CSS, for example, this can be really useful. But again, you don't have to know those things to make your site a little bit more accessible. It does have accessibility trainings. These are things that are going to be for a cost. So if you do have a little bit of extra money and you're wondering where to put it, training maybe a few of your employees in some accessibility tools might be a way to go. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about is a little bit about your color and your design techniques. So a lot of our nonprofits, we're producing, handouts, materials, we're creating graphics for our social media. And there's just a couple things to keep in mind when you're creating those to make them as accessible as possible. So as Amy mentioned a little bit earlier, we chose a really good contrast to create our presentation. So this is a really useful tool, and I think Pablo is going to put all these links or similar links in the chat. And this is just a color contrast checker. So you can see here, white on black is awesome. That's going to be a really, really good combo for people. It's going to be really easy to read. And you can see that this uses hex codes. And hex code, if you don't know what that is just how the computer essentially reads what color you want. And so white is all Fs, black is all zeros. But if you want to use a different color, there's a way to find out the hex code. I like this hex code finder because it allows you to do this pick from screen. So if you're designing, in something like Canva and you don't know what the color is, you can just pop it over to your screen and it will allow you to find that hex code. So then I can take the hex code and I can pop it into, say, the text color, and I'm going to find that this is a very poor option for my colors. So I use this all the time when I'm creating. If you spend any time or if you've looked at MREC's Instagram, I use a lot of sort of graphic black boxes with white text on them. So I can stop sharing my screen, Amy, if you want to go back to the presentation. So again, just to keep in mind as you're designing things, you don't have to have a designer on the team. You don't have to have someone with graphic design experience. But things that I would recommend are keeping your layouts nice and clear. Amy, if you want to hit slideshow, it'll go to the main one.
Oh, yes. Is it not doing that for you guys? Let me try again.
So make your headers and titles really large and clear. Use readable sans serif fonts and avoid crowding things with a lot of text and a lot of images. So bold and readable is going to be easier to digest for the eye. All right. And now that's the end of the digital walkthrough part of the presentation. Amy, we're still on
Oh.
having a little bit of technical difficulty.
Okay. Let me know what you see when I do this. Anything? Anything?
No, we're not seeing a screen share right now.
Okay, hold on one
Oh,
more.
wait.
Oh, okay. Let me fix one thing in my browser and then hopefully try again. Here we go. This I feel like is gonna work. And let me know what you see when I click that.
Perfect. We're good to go.
Beautiful. Trial and error. Yes, feel free. Anyone, please stop me if there's something blocking the screen or if it's not the correct slide. It's very conversational. I don't mind being stopped. We are gonna jump into section 2 now. We wanted to give you those digital tools first because they are completely free, aside from some of those things like WebAIM, the teaching resources. I love WebAIM. I think it's fantastic, and so much is free on that site. Perfect. Those things are also very easy to implement. They're kind of quick fixes, which I know can be very useful when you're trying to get something out quickly. But we also want to cover this next section. So the image on your screen is a white circle again, and it's a very simplified icon of a group of people. They're blue with black outline. And this section covers more of those team strategies. So these are things that you're going to think about with your whole team, and they might require more decision-making power. So definitely not quick fixes, but very worthwhile. So number one, please advertise. Tell us what you're already doing to provide access. The best thing that you can do to break down barriers between you and your audience is to let them know that you're ready to help. You can advertise the specific resources that you offer, and you can be vocal about your desire to meet whatever access needs come up. I will say, as someone who does need to request accommodations pretty regularly, it is so much easier to start that conversation with an organization that is excited to help rather than a group that made it really, really hard to find their access materials or made it hard to find the email that I was supposed to email. So just advertising even that you're excited to help is a very useful thing. Related to that, one mistake I see often in advertising, if you are offering services in a language other than English, please advertise in that language. This does not need to be complex. You don't need a whole paragraph. But if you ever have a line that says, please contact Amy for services in Spanish, or please contact this for this, just remember to translate it. Put the translated line directly under the English line so that the people who use the language you are offering that service in can read it just as easily as they would the English. Very, very simple, very, very easy to do. Next, and this is kind of a dense topic, so I hope that all of you have questions about this at the end, but think carefully about job descriptions and what the roles for accessibility are in your organization. I know that hiring a full-time access coordinator or a translator is a luxury in the nonprofit world. Not a lot of us can afford to do that. But you might be able to add specific lines in staff responsibilities that apply to access. For example, if a large number of your audience speaks Somali, you should hire a front desk attendant that speaks both English and Somali. So when you're putting out that hiring call, you're looking for the new front desk attendant, be very, very explicit and say, we require a person who can speak these two languages. Make sure they know that part of their job description is to answer the phone or to answer the door and greet people in both languages. That is an absolutely appropriate thing to do, and it's appropriate to say in your hiring calls. Another example would be if you are about to hire a program director and they're going to be leading programs that cater to youth in the deaf community, it's really a no-brainer that you should hire someone who uses ASL. And I would even go further and say you should hire someone from the deaf community because your staff should represent your audience. That's so, so important, and it's so easy to do if you think about it. So when you're writing that hiring call, an appropriate way to phrase this might be, we are looking to hire a candidate with demonstrated professional or personal experience in this community, because your staff should absolutely reflect the people that you are serving. Now, I want to be very clear about what I am not saying. I am not talking about making somebody the default access champion with no warning. And let me be clear on this slide too. So I am not saying that you should go back to the office today and you should go suddenly inform your staff. Guess what? We're all going to have access things in addition to all of our regular work responsibilities. That is not going to work. That is not a job that you can throw suddenly on someone. And I know as nonprofit people, we probably already have a huge checklist that we feel like we can't accomplish every day. So if you're adding access things as like the bottom two notes on a big checklist, you and I both know those things are not going to get done. So it's actually very disrespectful to the groups that you're telling me you want to help by trying to put that on someone who's not prepared to meet those needs. So if you are ever going to add items to a staff member's responsibility, you have to be sure to reduce their responsibilities in a different area so that the workload remains manageable. Doesn't that sound like a beautiful concept, a manageable workload? Nonprofit life is fun, isn't it? We notice especially this happens to diverse staff members who are working on maybe what we consider a not so diverse team. For example, if you have a whole team and there's only one person who uses a wheelchair, sometimes that person will just become the default access person and everybody will ask all the questions to them. They'll be seen as an expert, but that's not what we want you to do. Number one, because that person does not necessarily have the right experience to fulfill that role. Number two, that is not what you hired them to do. That's not in their job description. And number three, it is an unfair addition to their mental and emotional and physical workload. That's a lot of extra work to expect someone to take on. So I want to be clear. What I am telling you to do is that when you're hiring someone new, please be explicit in job descriptions so that when they read that initial call, that initial application, they know, yes, this is what I'm going to be doing every day. These are the access needs that are part of my job. Number two, you can absolutely ask for personal or professional experience in a community. Both of those are acceptable. And then if you're not hiring someone new, but you might want to flex job descriptions, think about prioritizing the most requested needs first. So please don't go and like randomly throw different things on random people and say, let's try to do everything all at once. No, you're a small organization. Think about the requests that you get most often, and prioritize those first. And then, of course, number four, we want to avoid burnout at all times. So I'll say a burnout can definitely come from having too much to do and putting too much on a certain staff member, but burnout can also come from too much change. So if you're thinking about changing job descriptions or doing anything like that, remember it's better to do it slowly and be sure about it rather than trying to do it really quickly and then maybe having to change again later and then change again later, because too much change can lead to burnout in the same way that too much work can lead to burnout. And I truly, truly hope you will all have questions about these two sides at the end, because I know that's kind of a dense topic. But that brings me to my favorite slide. Folks, I love research. Research is a beautiful thing. I think we should all do research all the time. But research is a great reminder that you don't need to do everything all the time, especially if you're a small organization. You probably know a lot of your audience members personally. So you can prioritize the needs that you know exist and then remain flexible and kind toward the needs that pop up along the way. You don't need to do everything all the time. That is an unrealistic goal. And when you are doing research, when you're asking your audience about barriers to access, be sure to go beyond just the people who already love you, because you probably already have a certain group of people who are comfortable with you. They know you very well. They know the process really well. They're good to go. They love you already. So for example, if you know MREC, you know that we love surveys. I personally love surveys. I'm always for more surveys. But you may have received a survey from us recently. So when MREC sends out those needs assessment surveys, yes, we do poll the people who receive grants from us, and we assume that they like us because we gave them money. We also poll the people who applied to us but did not receive funding. Still a good relationship, still good. And we also poll the folks who started an application with us but never finished it. So that's a lot of people that we may not be as familiar with. And that last group of people is the place where we are most likely to find access barriers. So when you are doing research, when you're asking people, hey, how can I help you? Be sure to go beyond just the people who already love you. They are already so comfortable with you. It is much better to look at those people who maybe weren't able to connect, who maybe tried to connect but ended up not, and say, hey, What happened here? How can I help you? What in particular prevented you from connecting with us fully? So that last group is always where we find the best advice for how to keep going and provide access. And I love it. I cannot describe enough how much I love research. If I could, I would have a whole presentation about it, but I won't. I'll move on to another beautiful idea, which is this idea of connection. So remember, you are not alone in this community. Minnesota is full of so many amazing groups who are doing amazing work, and they all would love to connect with you. Maybe not all. But as you're thinking about all these points we're talking about, just remember that finding like-minded organizations to partner with will help you in every part of your access work, and it will help you in the success of your organization in general. So a common thing that happens is if you're hosting an event and your building is not wheelchair accessible, obviously our dream is always, oh, let's get a huge grant and let's completely remake our building and make it completely accessible. Who has the money for that? Nobody. And your next thought is like, oh, let's rent out a beautiful event center. Again, that's really expensive. You might not be able to do that. And so a lot of organizations will end up just not providing access to people who use wheelchairs or other mobility aids. But here's an alternative. Consider co-hosting the event with an organization that does have an accessible building. For instance, your local library. Here's a fun tip. Libraries love to connect with you. I'll say that more. If you're paying for resources that aren't getting used, or maybe just one person is using your resources, which pause here and remind yourself, if one person is using it, it is absolutely worthwhile. Keep doing it. But you might think to yourself, I wish more people would benefit from this. That's a great chance to partner with another organization and say, hey, let's share resources now. Let's share audience in this small way now. And then maybe later down the road, they'll want to share with you as well. And I know that this can feel very intimidating, but remember too, an important point is that if you ever get requests for services you can't provide, you want to be able to have a really trustworthy list of other local sources that you can send your audience to. You never want to send your audience to someone that you don't know very well, someone that you're not sure can get the job done. It's really important to have these connections so that you can say, hey, I can't do this for you, but our neighbor, this other organization can. And yes, this is going to be a very, very slow, it's not a snap your fingers solution, but this solution is one of the ones that will benefit you the most. So think of it very slowly. And I'll say the people on this Zoom call are probably great people to connect with. So at the end, we'll definitely invite you to put your emails in the chat as well. It's been lovely to read all of your introductions. Also, websites are a great place to start and contact people. But yes, all the people in the Zoom probably would love to connect with you. Local libraries are an amazing source because all of them are centrally located. I believe they are required by law to be accessible. They also tend to have just mountains and mountains of free resources for people that they would love to share with you. And MRAC is your friend in the community as well. I will say for MRAC, if you call me tomorrow and you say that you have an event that's happening next week that you want to partner with, I can't do that. That's not going to happen. So I would recommend with all your relationships, try to think about starting the relationship a year in advance, get to know each other, send a few emails back and forth. Maybe you can have a staff lunch together one time, and then give at least 6 months when you're trying to propose an idea to someone. So that gives you time to brainstorm, go back and forth a little bit. Probably somebody needs to send it to a board meeting and get approval. So remember to give it lots of time. Again, this is the slowest solution, but it's also the best solution to when you feel like you don't have enough resources on your own. Connect with others. Somewhat related to that idea is this sort of one for all mentality. So I think sometimes when we get into leadership meetings and when we kind of get into our boardrooms and we talk about accessibility, it can feel very much like a spreadsheet, like data points, numbers, very, very separate groups. But remember that all of these aids are connected and people themselves are very intersectional. So remember that what benefits one group of people will probably benefit another. In fact, I very rarely find any conflicting needs. It is helpful to identify conflicting needs early. The big one that I encounter in my many years as an event planner is between immunocompromised folks and folks who use hearing aids. Because when you host an event for immunocompromised people, you want them to be distanced, you want everyone to be wearing a mask, you want to be conscious of all these things. But then, of course, anyone who uses a hearing aid suddenly is not able to read lips anymore, and all the sound is muffled, and everyone is a little bit further away. So those are two needs that very strongly conflict. But really, that is the only one that I've experienced in a major way. So I'll say, remember that in most instances, breaking down these barriers benefits everyone. And I want to really drive that idea home to you. Please keep in mind, you'll see a lovely graphic on your screen here. So there's all these interconnecting blue circles, and there's white text on top. This is not meant to be a precise diagram. This is not linked to any spreadsheet data. This is just a helpful graphic. But the white text on these blue circles all give examples of just different people who might experience barriers to your organization. So this is people who use mobility aids, the deaf or hard of hearing community, folks who are learning English as a second language. Notice I've also included people in here that are obviously not disability groups, and they're also not, marginalized groups, but they are just demographics of people who have very urgent needs that a lot of groups don't meet right away. So, for example, parents of young kids have a lot of needs that organizations are often blind to. People who use public transport have different needs than those who have cars. So just lots of different groups. But the point of this is to demonstrate that multiple people benefit when your organization is in the habit of providing access. And I'll say this, providing access as one-offs is very different than being in the habit, providing things before people even ask so that people don't have to go through the whole rigmarole of reaching out to you if they don't want to. The elderly in particular are an absolutely huge demographic of people who have a lot of needs, but are often not willing to ask for help. And sometimes they just don't know what to ask for because, as I'm sure we're all experiencing right now, aging comes with a lot of surprises, a lot of beautiful moments that just take a while to get used to. So they may not ask for help as frequently as they need it. But when you ensure that your spaces are wheelchair accessible, you are also making life easier for folks who use canes, who use walkers, any mobility device, strollers in particular. I take a lot of trips with my sister who uses this big stroller because she's got a baby and a 2-year-old and a kid who's holding her hand at all times. I cannot tell you the amount of museums that we cannot visit because their only door has 15 super steep steps going up to it. So she benefits absolutely from all these things that you do for those with mobility devices. In a similar way, this will be the last example I give, but when you add captions and visual aids to your presentation, you're not just helping the deaf community, but also your aging audience who is losing their hearing. You're helping people like me with ADHD who struggle to process auditory information, and you're helping audience members who are new to English. So I could go on and on about this idea, and I won't, I swear. But I want to really emphasize this idea that people are intersectional. These needs that they're expressing are intersectional. They're overlapping. So once you've identified what your top requests are, you can always look for ways to overlap solutions. So don't feel like these are all separate categories that you have to spend so much money on each one. Remember, these people are overlapping groups and the needs are overlapping. Now, truly, I've spoken too much. So I want to open the floor up to you folks as well. We've intentionally left a good chunk of time here at the end to hear your questions. So you can do that. You can unmute yourself, be very brave, and just start talking to us. We'd also love to read any questions from the chat. If you want to be anonymous, you can direct message Pablo and he'll read that out loud. Just say that you don't want your name mentioned. And then we as staff are going to work together to answer your questions. But I want to hear your experience as well. So if you disagreed with anything I said, or if you have some wisdom from a specific event or a specific partnership you did, I'd love to hear from that. But I'll stop here. I'll let the screen go. And Pablo, were there any questions from the chat that we should see right away?
There were some that I sort of tried to answer, obviously in a condensed format here in the chat, but I'll bring them up again so we can maybe discuss them as a group. So the first one that came up was, is alt text a description of the image, or is it the automated voice that reads the text on the screen?
So the alt text is the actual text that you're writing into that text box, and then so it has more than one function. It's going to show up if there's some why skipping balloons. It's going to show up if someone is using a screen reader, and so then that's going to be the voice, that's what it's going to read. And it's also going to show up if for some reason the image doesn't load correctly. So if there's like a problem with the server, or if there's any sort of like internet connection problems and the image won't load, then that text will appear instead. So yeah, so the text has multiple uses, and then the voice is going to be if if you're using a screen reader, then it's going to read that text.
Perfect. The next question I have is it necessary to add race to image descriptions? Would that be helpful or would that be considered negative?
Oh, yeah.
So that is kind of what I was referring to when if you don't know exactly how someone personally identifies. Um, uh, I would avoid it if you don't know exactly. Um, Simply because you don't want to, misidentify someone by mistake. If the image is something where the event or the picture, is specifically related to, I think, the races of the people in the photo, I would say do your best to, if you can find out who's in the photo and identify them, that would be great. If you can't, then you should make sure in the like around the image that it's clear that that event was, say, for, a specific group. It was an event for, the African American community or something like that. That will help provide context for the image. Um, if you can't, and you can put it in the alt text, that this was an event, you maybe describe the event. But again, do your best to identify the people in the photo, but avoid using racial markers if it's not an important part of the context and you can't confirm those identities. That would be my advice.
Great.
I'll also say Elliot has
Um,
a really good addition to that question, which is that even if you know how someone would identify on like a survey, like officially, you don't know how they like to be referred to. So it's not your place to assume that you know that personal detail about them.
yeah, great. The next question I have here is I'm a little worried about translation because sometimes translations can come out terrible, like on YouTube. Any suggestions on how to make sure that something is being translated correctly?
Mhm.
Yeah, so that I think that's a really tricky one. Um, if you're providing written materials that are translated, my best advice for that would be to start earlier than you usually would. So what you want to do there is have your written text really locked down, and then get it to someone that's going to translate it early. I do that because I want to have time for that translator to like spend the appropriate amount of time doing their job. If you send something to a translator the day before and they're rushing through it, that's going to be a moment when, mistakes might get made. Also, that helps if your original text, your English text most likely has to have changes. We try to lock it down as much as we can, but I'm an editor by trade, and there's always going to be changes. So what can happen then is that if you make changes to that English text and you already have your translation, then you have to find a way to make sure that that translation is updated too. Um, so that's more for your written materials. For, if you're doing a presentation or something like that, again, starting earlier is going to help. I'm not entirely sure about automatic translations. I think that, they're really good if that is, what is accessible to your organization. If you have an opportunity to, um, you know, either have someone at your event that speaks that language, that's great. Um, but again, if, we want to try to do our best to meet people with the resources that we have. So if you're uploading something to YouTube, it can translate it. It's maybe not going to be great. But I think that a lot of people will appreciate the effort. So, if maybe the translation isn't exact, they're going to feel better having been thought of in that we're thinking about, Spanish speakers being a large part of our audience, and we're thinking of you and creating Spanish speaking materials. I
Yeah.
hope that answers the question.
And I encounter this problem a lot too, just for recreational purposes. I watch a lot of videos in other languages. I've noticed on YouTube, sometimes you can get a transcript as opposed to captions, and transcripts for both YouTube and Zoom are usually better than the captions. And then sometimes, if I feel like it's really bad, I'll turn on the voice to text function on my computer or my phone, and often that picks things up more clearly than the automated captions for some reason. I've not done this, but I've heard some people recommend like AI caption makers. I don't know how people feel about AI, but you might want to look into something like that as well. But yeah, like AJ said, definitely do as much as you can, and then be sure that you're vocal about, hey, we're doing everything that we can, and we do care about you, and start that conversation with folks.
Yeah, and I
Yeah, I
believe
think
we have someone who would like to say something about the translations here. Gerardo,
Can I say something?
of course.
absolutely.
Okay. I'm a musician and I speak English and Spanish. I have seen in two important museums here in the cities. I don't want to say the names of the museums. Description or one is a music related museum. I think they sent the information to translation agency. Music vocabulary, like any art vocabulary, is very specific. Especially music, I think is very technical. So, for example, the notes, no, whole note, half note, whatever. Those are not the names of the notes in Spanish. That's just an example. So the translators don't know this technical thing. So some of the signs that I have seen in museums are horribly wrong. I have been in conferences also where they use translators and they don't know the specifics of like music description, like interpretation, and they translate it the way the word translates from a dictionary, not from music vocabulary. So if somebody's gonna use a translate things, I recommend going to someone that knows that technique in painting, for example, or something, because translating with a dictionary, just one quick rule, say the tie and music, you know, it could be a tie. It can be the verb tie. I have seen words used like that, and that tie is called different thing in music. So
Yeah.
that's just an example. So my recommendation is, if you want to use a translator, do not go to the translation agency unless they have someone that knows that specific language. Otherwise, your translation is gonna be horribly and embarrassingly wrong. And again, some museums in the cities have that in the lake right there with the translation, and it's really bad. It looks bad. So that's my input, my opinion. Someone that has done translations like this and have seen those things. So they charge very expensive. These agencies, they
Yeah.
pay this much to the translator, and the translation is wrong. So just be careful. It's my recommendation. That's all.
Yeah. No, I think
Thank
that,
you.
yeah, I think that's super helpful because that brings to my mind something else. I talked about reading levels earlier, and reducing the jargon in your writing as much as possible. I understand in music there's specific words that you need to use, but if you're using a lot of like
Yeah,
jargon specific to your organization, that's
agree.
not only going to make it hard for some, people to understand, but it's also going to make that translation hard. So again, all of these things, like Amy was saying, they kind of fit together. So yeah, keep that jargon low. That's going to improve those translations. And then, if you're hiring and you're going to have like a lot of music terms, try to hire someone that speaks that language so that they can make those appropriate and correct translations. Thank you so much for that comment.
Yeah, that was excellent.
Great. The next question I have here is, how is MREC handling access requests now? Does someone new have the access coordinator role, or are you all going to be attending national accessibility conferences?
That's a great question, and I won't give too official of an answer because I am not the CEO of MREC. Not that we have a CEO.
Executive director.
Yes, executive director. I can say we don't officially have an access coordinator title for anyone right now. Each of us, when we get hired, go through a pretty extensive access training. I think part of the reason is because each of us interacts with the audience so much that we really all need to be prepared to do these things. So it's not just one person needs to jump in for us. We all need to be ready to handle that. But feel free to email us later if you want more details like that. I can ask our executive director to step in on that email as well. But great question. Yeah.
Yeah, we're all trying to be, we're like Amy said, we're all trying to be sort of ready to respond to any access needs that we encounter.
Perfect. The next question is, besides Googling research sources ourselves, who locally has info on all these best practices and who's doing them?
Great question. I think maybe there's not one answer to that. I would say, MRAC knows a lot of people. We know a lot of the standards, especially because we get state money, so we have to follow a lot of legal standards. So we're pretty up to date on that. I always love Springboard for the Arts and what they're doing. They tend to be really good about employing people from any marginalized communities that they're serving. So those people are even more qualified to say, hey, here's the best practices. Um, but yeah, I would say there's just like a long list of people. So feel free to talk more about that later. Um, yeah.
I'm not sure if there's any groups that are specific, or I'm sure there probably are, but I don't know off the top of my head who specifically is focused just on local accessibility. If there are people in the meeting here today that do know, like please put that in the chat so that we can all avail ourselves of that information.
Great. The next question here is, when planning an event, how important is it to state in advance that A, access accommodations are available, and B, what the deadline is in order to have a chance to find, for instance, ASL interpreters?
That is
Yeah,
such a good question. Yeah, our marketing person, take it away,
sure. Yeah, no, I think that those are both really important things to note. I think that like we hired Lori on to do ASL for this in advance so that was already something that's available. And I tried to put that in the marketing materials for it. Like there will be live ASL interpretation, and then just say if you have additional access needs and then where to go. And then typically, we usually say a week in advance. That's usually a good amount of time to, find a translator or find an interpreter. You can really put in what's ever going to be good for your organization. It can be a little bit longer. Sometimes in previous jobs, we've said 2 weeks. But, do your best to accommodate any requests, even up until the last moment. Now, if someone calls and asks for an ASL interpreter, an hour before the event, that's not going to be something that you can accommodate probably. But, 2 days before, you maybe could try. So you would say, let me try and I'll get back to you if I can accommodate that request. So yes, you can absolutely say though in your materials, like, please let us know a week in advance so that we can accommodate your needs.
It's always best to be clear about what you can and cannot do. Even if you can't provide everyone everything, just be clear about what you can do and what you can't.
I see a question here that says, MRAC probably sees a lot of arts organizations' budgets as they seek grants. How many have reasonable budgets for accessibility, and what is reasonable?
Well, I don't know that we can really comment on that. We're certainly not going to share anybody's monetary information. We
And
see a
actually,
wide spectrum. Yeah.
I don't know that that is something that comes into the budgets and the grants, is it? It is? Okay.
We don't see their whole budget. We just see their project budget. So yeah.
Yeah, the financial information that we receive from organizations is just their overall arts budget if they are a non-arts organization, or if they're an arts organization, just their total budget. We don't necessarily see a breakdown of their organization's budget and how that's allocated. Now, in terms of the budget that they're requesting for their project, they can certainly indicate a budget line for accessibility, but that is not a required item from um, from our guidelines. So if they choose to put that on there, great. If they don't, it is not something that we're asking of folks.
Yeah. And as far as an appropriate budget, what I would say for that is to maybe spend like a fiscal year seeing what you do and what you make and how that costs and how much that costs, and then try to incorporate that as you're planning the next budget. So if you end up spending, $500 on translation and, some additional money, um, creating different kinds of access, then try to incorporate that in the next budget so that you have money available for your accessibility. Um, I'm a communications person. I don't know anything about financial. So that would be my guess, I'm just sort of, we're just talking kind of idea, but,
Yeah, every group
something
is,
to think
yeah,
about.
budgets can really, really go wide. Um, Pablo, do you want to read this question about funders on accessibility?
Mm-hmm.
And we're getting to the end
Yeah,
here.
so someone's asking here about, does anyone know funders that focus on accessibility? My org is hoping to have more sensory and accessibility initiatives and needs more financial support to make that happen.
So we know because we work at MREC, the three biggest funders for Minnesota projects are the Minnesota State Arts Board, us, and places like Forecast Public Arts, which is lovely. And so all of those places have grants that aren't necessarily focused on accessibility, but accessibility projects are absolutely a great pitch for those grants. So definitely check out our website and MSAB. I believe they still have one grant open right now that could be a great fit for this project. And then there are other places like Forecast and Springboard that have like smaller funding opportunities and like community funding opportunities sometimes. They might be able to connect you with certain people who want to do a crowdfunding idea if you have a specific accessibility project in mind. But yes, basically, anybody that's giving out grants in Minnesota will allow you to do accessibility projects as your project. And I don't want to speak for everybody, but for the most part, that is true.
And I will
Someone
say
just mentioned here that that they got a arts access grant from the State Arts Board that helped with their accessibility needs. So sounds like they could be a good fit.
yeah, and I also know if you're not doing something that's art specific, the Minnesota Department of Human Services also does grants for various accessibility needs for improving accessibility and that kind of stuff. I don't know much about the specifics of those grants, but I do know that they do have some money for people that need improvement in their accessibility.
Okay, and we are technically officially at the end of our time here. I know staff have budgeted a little extra time, and our interpreter is here for another half hour. So we're going to keep reading questions, but I understand if people need to run away back to the office after their lunch break. Thank you so much for coming. We were so glad to have you here, and you will get that recording in your inbox soon. But as more questions come in, we want to keep answering them.
I don't think I see any more questions.
Excellent. I'm loving all these comments. I love all the commentary as we were speaking. That's so helpful.
And if you want to provide any feedback about this presentation, you can go ahead and send it to just info@mrac.org. That'll come to me. We also provided those that contact at the beginning, and be looking for the recording of the presentation in the next couple of days. I'm not sure when we're going to get that out, but it will be soon.
Yes. Thank you all so much. It was so great to see you. Again, staff will hang around for a little bit longer as needed. But thank you so much for all your comments today.
Thank you, everybody.